Welcome back to yet another briefing. This briefing is number 18. Today we'll look more closely at the first priority of the global strategy, security of the Union. As you might remember, there are 5 of them, and this is about the security of the Union or our Union. The fact that the strategy text immediately links up with internal security is interesting because there is now a dedicated commissioner working with this topic, the last UK commissioner if Brexit goes through. And then in turn there are 5 subheadings under this first priority. Those are first security and defense, then counterterrorism, then cybersecurity, energy security, and finally strategic communications. The last item refers mainly to disinformation and propaganda. So you might ask what happens to irregular migration. Is that item also grouped under this heading? And the answer is no. It is grouped under the second heading, State and Society Resilience to the East and to the South. So it should first be noted that when discussing security and defense under this first heading, several links are being made to the defense policies of the member states. Of course, it's already interesting that this heading appears under internal security and similarly under the auspices of the Security Union Commissioner. So let us immediately clarify what are his responsibilities. Do they include security and defense? Well, he has a responsibility to ensure the swift implementation of the steps needed to build an effective and sustainable security union. What is that? Well, it means to strengthen the fight against terrorism and organized crime, to reinforce the security response to radicalization, and increasing efforts to tackle terrorist propaganda and hate speech online, to improve information and intelligence sharing, including a stronger role for EU agencies, reinforcing the capacity to protect critical infrastructure and soft targets, fighting cybercrime through enhanced cybersecurity and digital intelligence, ensuring that EU finances of security research targets the need of security practitioners, and develop solutions to forthcoming security challenges. So as you see, this is not CSDP. So frankly, this terminology does not make it easy for citizens to orient themselves, and the background is of course very much political. The mandate for the new Security of the Union Commissioner is developed from the perspective of internal security and terrorism after 9/11, whereas CSDP has another history, as we know, more linked to international operations. So when also the European Commission describes the first priority of the global strategy on its website, it makes an effort to bridge the two cultures of CSDP and internal security in a way which is on the one hand quite innovative, but on the other confusing in terms of who is in charge of implementation of this objective and what is the legal basis of it. Let us quickly read through the summary of the objective in the text. The security of our union, I'm now talking about the global strategy text. The EU global strategy starts at home. Our union has enabled citizens to enjoy unprecedented security, democracy and prosperity. Yet today, terrorism, hybrid threats, economic volatility, climate change and energy insecurity endanger our people and territory. An appropriate level of ambition and strategic autonomy is important for Europe's ability to promote peace and security within and beyond its borders. We will therefore enhance our efforts on defense, cyber, counter-terrorism, energy and strategic communications. Member states must translate their commitments to mutual assistance and solidarity enshrined in the treaties into action. The EU will step up its contribution to Europe's collective security, working closely with its partners, beginning with NATO. Clearly, there is here a reference to the solidarity clause enshrined in the treaties, and how this has been done has already been illustrated through the terrorist attacks on 30th November 2015 in Paris. here we are benefiting from a blog piece by Caroline Moser, where she quotes a relevant article in the Treaty of Lisbon. So I quote, "If a member state is a victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other member state shall have towards it an obligation of aid and assistance by all the means in their power, in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. This shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defense policy of certain member states. Commitments and cooperation in this area shall be consistent with commitments under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which of course, for those states which are members of it, remains the foundation of their collective defense and the forum for its implementation." As a reference to Article 51 of the UN Charter indicates, the provision is related to self-defense matters, even though the wording alludes to an armed aggression and not to an armed attack. You can read more about this rather complicated legal discussion in her long article, which stresses that the EU provision does not trigger automatic or military support, but grants discretion to member states, so it's more of a mutual assistance and a mutual defense clause. In her view, France is requesting her European neighbours to stand united against external secure threats, not only by the characteristic means, by concrete military commitments for activities outside the Union's borders. What you should know here is that there is also another clause in another part of the treaty, namely on the functioning of the European Union, which is a so-called solidarity clause, which is applicable in the event of a terrorist attack. This is the so-called Article 222 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which is focusing on assistance inside the territory of the attacked state. In this particular case, France aimed at increasing support outside of its borders, promoting trans-border cooperation. But clearly France did not wish to use a community-based mechanism, rather an intergovernmental mechanism allowing for direct bilateral cooperation between member states. So what happened? Well, Germany and some other member states actually chose to offer military assistance to the EU training mission in Mali, something which had been planned already before the Paris attacks. So now you see on the screen the solidarity clause as set out in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, the Article 222, which I mentioned, which is framed as an action based on a joint proposal by the Commission and the High Representative. So this is a more of a EU institutional thing than the other one. So what the global strategy does in essence is to make a very light reference to the mutual assistance and solidarity clauses, linking up with 5 areas of action: security and defense, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, energy security, and strategic communications. Most of which actually falls under responsibilities of the Security Union Commissioner, with the exception of CSDP itself. So in terms of implementation, if this first priority of the global strategy is going to be operationalized, there will be a need for further clarification in terms of the way the different clusters of the Commission will work. Let me, not to be complicate too much here, just to summarize what one can interpret as the objective here, namely to link up internal and external security in a strategic way, not being too much bound by the treaty provisions or the actual administrative organization of the institutions. The main point of reference is here to what extent there will be ownership of this part of the strategy also in the European Commission departments responsible for your internal security. In terms of strategic documents, the main point of reference for the new British Commissioner will be the Agenda for Security, adopted in April 2015 by the Commission, refocused as a security union in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Paris. The way the European Commission has framed the notion of the security union is explained in the communication that I referred to above before on April 2016. In a security union, a police officer in one member state should have the same reflex to share relevant information with colleagues over the border as he would do with fellow officers within his own country. This requires a step change in two respects. At European level, we need to urgently address the remaining gaps, fragmentation and operational limitations of the information exchange tools in place to make sure that structures for cooperation are as effective as possible, and to make sure that European legislation to tackle terrorist, criminal and their activities is up to date and robust. This is necessary, says the communication, to create an environment of confidence among national authorities and the legal and practical tools that allow them to work together to address common challenges. The full added value of an effective security union depends crucially on the use that is made of these tools and structures to close any future operational loopholes and police intelligence gaps. That requires a culture change at the level of member states for their law enforcement authorities to acquire the habit of systematic cooperation and information sharing right down to the last policeman. A sense of common responsibility and the will and capacity to turn that into action are essential if we are to overcome the fragmentation which terrorists and criminals are so effective at exploiting. So what we're clearly talking about here is a remit of the Justice and Interior Ministers. We are not likely, thus, to see the Commissioner for the Security Union refer to the global strategy very much in his work. It's not likely that the first priority of the global strategy will in itself be an organizing framework for the work of the European Commission in the area of internal security. What the strategy does, as I said, is however to link up the work of the defense ministers in terms of CSDP missions and operations, link them up to European border and coast guards to enhance border protection and maritime security by focusing on strategic autonomy also in the context of defense. Similarly, under counterterrorism, the work in the field of external action, to a large extent under the auspices of foreign ministers, is linked up to the work of internal security in the context of the security union, notably as, for instance, as regards radicalization. Then again, when one comes to cybersecurity, links are made to the role of CSDP and external cooperation on cybersecurity with core partners such as the United States and NATO. Then again, on energy, the references to the goals of the energy union is made, although this priority is not explicitly illustrated with examples outside the remit of energy ministers themselves. And as for the last priority, strategic communications, this again links up to the responsibility of the new British Commissioner. It requires a cooperation between the Commission and the External Action Service. So this concludes this briefing, where I've tried to say that the first priority of the global strategy essentially means trying to link up ongoing work on internal security with the external side.